Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. In the Dhamma discussion, the question time today, was one of the things that came up was the issue of difficult conversations, difficult relationships, how to work skillfully with those when we are encountering people with different perspectives, different priorities in life, different moods. How can we best work? How can we best live and relate with other people in the family, in the workplace, in the world around us, in the monastery? It's all, the issues are essentially the same in the human community. Well, the issue of communication and trying to be helpful and trying to establish harmonious connections that we have with each other is quite challenging, but it's also, I would say, an area that's related to the subject of metta, which has been coming up quite a lot. The usual dialogue that we have with other people is, I'm trying to understand you, and you are hopefully trying to understand me. I'm trying to get my point across to you, and you're trying to get your point across to me. So there's the effort at communication. But again, it's also, along with being connected to metta and loving kindness, it's also connected to self-view. Because the more I'm trying to communicate with you, and there's a solid me here and a solid you out there, kind of a separate, independent self and other, then no matter how hard we try, there can always be a disconnection, a lack of real communication, a lack of communion. So that this is a helpful area to look at. People here on the retreat, everyone is keeping silence apart from the interviews and the Dhamma discussion. So it's not so much of an issue this week, but come Sunday, when we all start talking again and re-enter the world of activity and connections and family and relationships, then that all comes very much alive. So it can be confusing or frustrating. We can try very, very hard to be being compassionate, to be helpful, and then if we're experiencing that effort of, I'm not getting through, or I'm not really being heard, or I can't really understand what he wants, it can be frustrating and difficult, hard for us to work with. So that I feel that if we look at this area and see what are the attitudes of mind that we have, what are our expectations, then the picture can change somewhat. Many years ago, when, and I've told this story many, many times, but it was extremely impactful, very striking when this dialogue took place. It was many years ago in the early days of Chitta Viveka Monastery in Sussex. And speaking about having difficulties with the family, one of the 8 precept nuns, the general issue or situation with her family was one of criticism and tension. They were not happy with her being a nun. They were very conservative Christians, and they were very critical of Ajahn Amaro and Buddhism, and they wouldn't allow their daughter's shaved head to be seen in the house. So if she went to go and visit them, she always had to wear a woolly hat, because they literally refused to see her shaved head in the home. So there had been some history of tension and difficulty there. This nun was she's a very, very sincere person, and was keen to try and do things in a good way and to be helpful. And when tea time, we were having a Santanatam, Dhamma questions with Lumpur Sameto, and she asked the question, what is the best thing that we can do in relationship to our family? What's the kindest thing we can do to be helpful to our parents in particular? And the response that Lumpur Sameto gave, and when he said it, it was almost like he was hearing it for the first time as well as the rest of us. Because what he said was, the kindest thing that you can do for your parents is not to create them. So a very interesting answer. The kindest thing you can do for your parents is not to create them. And particularly in this Buddhist culture, where being respectful towards your parents and grateful and to be working hard to support your parents is a very, very strong part of society in Thailand and the Southeast Asia. But I would say that comment is even more relevant here than in the Western world, where our relationship to our parents can be a bit more distant and a bit more psychologically and physically distant than you find here in Asia. So what does that mean, to say the kindest thing you can do for your parents is not to create them? It doesn't mean that when you go to visit your mum, you say, "You don't exist, mum. You're a nice person, but you don't really exist." That's not what this means. What it means is that we don't create the idea of our parents or other loved ones, our children, our spouses, our partners, our ajahns, our disciples. You're not creating ideas about them, creating a fixed view, a fixed picture, and then carrying that around. And then when we don't do that, when we refrain from creating people in our mind and carrying them around, then when we actually meet, when we have an encounter, then what happens is we're meeting what's actually present, rather than our idea or our projection or our anxiety about that person, our memories of how it's been in the past. Because if we create someone, it means we got the story of, oh, my mother's like this, my father's like that, my sister's this way, my son is like this, my daughter, she's like that, and my husband, or my wife, my partner, my ajahn, we tell these stories. It's the kind of the sort of narrative self, but also the narrative other. We and like I was telling stories about my family, my father's, my mother's focus on table manners, or my parents' family history. So we repeat these stories, and we make them into solid realities, or seemingly solid realities. And so we are continually rehearsing those images, those pictures, those judgments, things that we like and that we approve of, things that we dislike, or things that we're afraid of, things that we have opinions about. So the more that we create each other and carry those perceptions and opinions, those judgments around, when we meet, you might be face to face, sitting across a table or across a room, but when you're speaking to your set of projections. And rather than actually really meeting, quote unquote, the other person. And similarly, particularly if they're not a Dhamma practitioner, they're very likely to be doing the same with you. So you don't actually have a dialogue, you have two monologues, to understand the English. Like, you're kind of saying your piece to your projection of them, and they're saying their piece to their projection of you. So then we wonder why there's a lack of harmony or communication. If you think, how does he know? It's like, it's not psychic power, it's human nature and statistics. This is how most of us are as human beings in our relationships. So this the development of insight and letting go of self-view, and what I was saying to our friend here about body awareness, all of these things can be extremely helpful in not creating each other, not creating your parents, your children, your partners, your fellow monastics, your fellow members of your society, because the insight into not self, its partner is insight into not other. And to be, say, living life based on mindfulness and wisdom, and tuning into the time, the place, the situation, and letting our conversations, our time together with each other arise from that contact and be guided by what's useful, what's appropriate in the moment, then we find we can have genuine, helpful dialogues. The aspect of body awareness is very important. I found, particularly, as I say, my habit was always to be drawn into other people's moods. If they were excited, I would get excited too. If they were anxious, I would get anxious too. If they were irritated, I would join in with that. So the more that we can notice the sensations of our body, feel how we are holding the body, whether we're sitting in a chair or we're standing talking, or we're just on a phone, or having a Skype call through a computer screen, whatever it might be. If there's that dividing our attention a little bit to notice how is the body being held? Are my hands clenched? Are my shoulders up around my ears? Is my stomach tight as a drum? Are my teeth clenched? Am I talking through clenched teeth? How is it? What is the body feeling like? And often it doesn't take a lot of effort or a lot of attention, just a certain amount of attention, just to notice from time to time, okay, the body is stressing, my shoulders are tight, or my stomach is tight. Okay, being aware of that, then letting that awareness inform relaxation. Particularly if the other person is saying things that are challenging or upsetting or irritating, like, she's to notice the physical reaction that's present, and to relax with that, to let the body soften and be at ease, and to settle. And it is quite remarkable how, and I think I was saying this earlier today, how if I think in one of the interview groups, how if you're being if you're on the receiving end of some aggressive words or an aggressive manner from your boss, say, or family member, and and then you tighten up, you're feeling afraid, you get defensive, and you kind of put the barriers up, then that tends to cause the aggression to increase from the other side. If, however, you notice, like, wow, he's really in a mood today. It's really this is a strong delivery, and you make the effort to relax, to be paying attention, to be receiving what the person is putting out, but to be open-hearted, to have the acceptance, the metta of acceptance of whatever that person's putting out, then you're not creating the signals of fear or of defensiveness. You're not intimidated in the same way, and your body language, your expression, just the way that you're breathing, all of that that contributes to the exchange, and particularly if it's in the same room, face to face. And that what can easily happen is, if you're not giving the signals back of I'm intimidated, I'm defending myself, and you're not going to upset me, but and then thereby creating more tension. If you're relaxed, if you're at ease, if you're open, then it's almost like the person is pushing against an open door. If you understand, there's not a resistance there, so that without meeting fearfulness or defensiveness, then their aggression doesn't have anything to push against. It's like pushing against an open door, and it much more easily comes to an end. So you're listening to what the person's saying, you're receiving what they're saying and hearing it, but yet making that choice not to be intimidated, not to be defensive, but to instead hear what they say. Let there be some sati sampajanya, that of receiving what they're saying into the space of the heart, and then similarly responding from that place of sati sampajanya, of intuitive awareness. So again, not being, not creating them as a person, and not having a prepared script of what you want to say, but attuning to the moment and let the words come. As I was saying, if we're really attentive, then the appropriate words for the situation will tend to arise and tend to come into being. And when we're not intimidated or buying into that contention, then it can help diffuse the mood or the aggression that the other person is displaying. The dialogue, I think maybe I mentioned a few days ago, where the Buddha was sitting in the forest, and this Brahmin, a professional philosopher, debater called Dandapani, was walking through the woods, and he saw the Buddha sitting under a tree, and he thought, oh, this is that great Samana Gautama. He's famous as a teacher, as a brilliant expounder of philosophy, but he's not as clever as me. I'm a professional. I really know what I'm doing. And so he thought he'd go and challenge the Buddha, and to get into a debate and show the Buddha how that Dandapani, was actually far superior. So kind of looking for an argument, looking for a conflict. And so he went up to the Buddha sitting under a tree and said, so you are the Samana Gautama, is that correct? And said, yes, indeed. And so what is it that you practice? What is it that you teach? What is the philosophy that you follow? And so getting the Buddha to describe his teaching, his practice, and then Dandapani would sort of jump in and refute, would make a criticism of the Buddha's teaching and how his practice was wrong and faulty. But the Buddha was an extremely gifted reader of social situations, as well as having psychic powers. So he knew exactly where Dandapani was coming from. So his response was, from that place of mindfulness and wisdom, he said, I follow such a practice that involves non-contention with anyone in the world. So I'm not going to argue with you. And so because he was speaking from a place of great peacefulness and clarity, and says, the philosophy I follow is non-contention, not contending with anyone. You're looking for contention, you're looking for a fight, an argument, you're pushing against an open door. So I'm not going to pick this up, and it's up to you what you do with this. So Dandapani was not ready for that, and as it says in the sutta, this is in the Madhu Pindaka Sutta, the Honeyball Sutta. It says he clicked his tongue, and his forehead puckered into 3 furrows, and then wagging his head, he went off into the forest having nothing to say. So that was an example of how to receive somebody's aggression with great peacefulness, with respectfulness, but absolutely appropriately. And it led to Dandapani couldn't start a fight. And also it led to a great teaching that is on conceptual proliferation. So I feel this is a helpful principle, not creating others to be bringing into awareness where we're engaging with others, and so that hopefully you can understand what I mean by that, not creating self and not creating others, so that we're in a way we're creating an atmosphere of freshness. There's a kind of an unburdened, unbiased attitude in our heart when we meet with other people. We're not expecting them to be a particular way. We're not wanting them to be like this or like that. We're open to however it happens to be, and then responding from how it is in this moment. So this is also related to another teaching that I like to emphasize, because what we don't realize is that we each create our own version of the world moment by moment. And another of the causes of conflict and difficulty in our lives, I would suggest, again, not reading anybody's mind, just how we are as human beings. One of the causes of conflict and struggle in the workplace, in the family, and society is that in our ordinary everyday way of thinking, we assume that we see the world as it actually is. Is that? I don't think that's too much of an exaggeration. Most of us go through life thinking, yeah, I see the world the way it is. But if you have been watching your mind for the last week and for however many years practicing meditation, then we each begin to realize that what we experience is not so much the world, but our mind's version of the world. So our mind makes a representation, it makes a best guess of what's going on, of the place where we are, what's happening around us, what's the best way to work with the situation that we're in. So the teaching I like to quote on this, which is, it's a short sutta, but one of the most, I would say, important and profound teachings that we have in the Pali Canon, and it's related to the Buddha's definition of what he means by loka, the world. And what he says is that through which one is a perceiver of the world and a conceiver of the world, that is called the world in this Dhamma and discipline. And what is it whereby, what is it through which one is a perceiver of the world? That's loka sanyi, is the Pali, and a conceiver of the world, loka mani. And then he answers his own question: the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind. So this is the means whereby one is a perceiver of the world and a conceiver of the world. So the world, according to the Buddha's definition, is not the planet or the cosmos and the stars and in the sky, but the world is, again, much closer to home. It's the world of our experience. It's the world as our mind puts it together. So he says that whereby we are a perceiver of the world and a conceiver of the world, that is the world. And what does that means? What is that method whereby we are conceiving and perceiving the world, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking? So what it's saying is the only world that we can meaningfully talk about is the world of our own experience. Now, our experience might be having studied a lot of science, and you might be a biologist or a zoologist or a physicist or a chemist or an astronomer, a doctor. There's a lot of knowledge that we have about the world, this body, the biological world, the chemical, physical world, the astronomical world. But those books, those lectures all came through our eyes and our ears, through the thinking mind. So it's not saying that there is, all of this is just our imagination, that we're kind of dreaming the world into existence. But what it's saying is the only world that we can meaningfully talk about is the world of our experience. And so the Buddha brings it right home. Like I was saying, he didn't talk about the origin of living beings or the ultimate beginning of things, but he talked about how dukkha begins. So when he, again, in a similar way, rather than talking about the world as the planet and the cosmos and all the stars and galaxies, the world is seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking. That's the world that we can know. And so I feel this is a very, very helpful teaching. In Western philosophy, this is called a phenomenological approach. And so this little book that was reprinted here in Thailand. And I think copies are available here in the lobby. Free, of course, but this is very significant, because the more that we can appreciate that I don't see the world, you don't see the world, you see your mind's version of the world, so necessarily your world is going to be at least a bit different from mine. That's got to be the case. So if we really take that to heart, then is it any surprise that one person says, oh, that's ugly. Another one says, oh, it's beautiful. One says, this is delicious. Another one says, ugh, do you want to eat that, really? Of course, because we live in different versions of the world. And so it's a very simple, a short teaching, but it conveys a very, very significant principle. So if we can really take that to heart, then in our relationships with other people, of course, your children experience a different world than you do. Like I was talking about my parents. So when it was only when I got to be about the age that my parents were when I was about 3 or 4 years old. So when I got into my early 40s, I found myself able to put myself into my parents' shoes. If you have that expression in Thai or in Pasir Malaysia. So that my parents were always them, your mum and dad. They're sort of different group, different species. I couldn't really compare my life to theirs. But when I got to be the kind of age that they were both in their late 30s, early 40s when I was born. So when I got to that age, like I'm looking in the mirror, I think, oh, hello, Dad. Didn't expect you here, but then I don't know why, but for some reason I could put myself into their shoes. My dad was this age when I was born, or my dad was this age when I was 3 or 4, and my mother similarly. And so I began to kind of contemplate their life. And as I said, my father's parents, my paternal grandfather, my father's father, he was born before London had electricity, before motor cars existed. 1863, my grandfather was born. Is it any surprise that my dad, growing up in a family with a father born in 1863, his mother born in 1875, so of course, his conditioning, what he got from his parents in a Victorian family, is completely different than me, born in 1956, growing up in the kind of hippie 60s. So naturally, we are living in very different worlds. So when I was that kind of an age, in my early 40s, had these embarrassing memories of, oh my goodness, those kind of shouting arguments over Sunday lunch, those kind of pompous and kind of conceited views I had judging my mother and my father, and why they couldn't see, why they didn't agree with me, why they had a whole different value system. And I contemplated their lives, and I thought, you moron, you're an idiot. You know, they grew up in a completely different world, completely different. It was like what Chiang Rai was like, 150 years ago. What was this? What was here in 1863? Probably a lot of forest. A few small villages maybe, but totally different world. Hadn't even heard of electricity, or even petrol probably by that time. Completely different world. So is it any surprise that you don't really understand each other, that you can't really communicate? So it was a mixture of relief and embarrassment. So thinking that through, I think, wow, I was so stupid and conceited. Why didn't I really consider how different their lives had been, and how, as individuals who made it through the Second World War and survived, and starting a life in the English countryside, that how could it not be that their background, their lives, their histories made such a different set of perceptions of the world than my sisters and myself. So that was quite insightful to really appreciate that. I wasn't particularly aware of this sutta teaching at that time, but the basic principle of like, wow, no wonder we argued so much, because we are in very, very different versions of the world. So of course, there was a lack of understanding. So when I really began to appreciate that, I found it was much easier to get on with my parents, much easier to have sympathy, to empathize with their point of view. And I probably was much easier to live with and get along with for them as well. So this is a helpful principle to bring to mind, to keep remembering that what we experience is not the world, it's my mind's version of the world. So of course, it's conditioned by the family you're born into, how many siblings you have, how many sisters, how many brothers, if you have any sisters or brothers, were you adopted? Were your parents, were you an expected child, an unexpected child? You a child of older parents? Did the marriage break up? What school did you go to? Were you very poor? Were you very rich? Did you have a title growing up? All of these things contribute and have a big effect. As I was living in the Sangha and spending time in community and getting to know other people's lives, then I really began to similarly to appreciate, wow, people grew up in very different worlds. The members of the Sangha, nuns and monks who were adopted as children, their perception of life and the feelings of security or family were very, very different than those who were, with their birth parents. People who came from broken homes, very, very different background, very different experience. So it was over the years, it's been very instructive, very revealing, and to say, oh yeah, we have very different expectations, very different things that we are conditioned by, and within that we can see, well, patterns of conditioning that have brought painful results, kind of defilements within us, or anxieties, or aversions, or biases. My mind is like this, or my personality is like this, but that's probably because we lost all our money when I was very young, or we suddenly moved to that huge house, and the whole world was different. So that we can look at the patterns of conditioning and understand both where our difficulties come from, also our blessings. So again, just to maybe bring my parents into the picture again. So I never saw my parents argue, not once. The entire time I argued with them, but they never argued with each other, at least never in front of the children. And so when I casually mentioned that once or many years ago, like I never saw my parents argue, I get this look from the other Sangha members, like, really? So yeah, I never saw my mum and dad argue with each other. They were extremely disciplined and never argued in front of the children, but that was a standard they maintained. That there was the home was a safe place, and there was harmony in the family. Similarly, I noticed over time, particularly being in a teaching role, how one of the things that people would be distressed by or would have as a difficulty was if they were unfairly treated as children, or either as young children or growing up, and how if their parents or the school teachers demonstrated favoritism, like saying, "Oh, you're the best student," or "You're the star pupil," or like you're worth sending to a great school, but your brother's useless. We're not going to waste money on him, but we're going to spend a lot of money to send you to a good school because you're the bright one. And it would amaze me, people actually being told such things by their parents, literally being told, "We're not going to waste money on sending you to a good school because you're useless." And people hearing that, aged sort of 6 or 7 years old, I would really be kind of my jaw hanging open, like, wow. Because again, one of the things that I feel extremely grateful in my family, my parents were not arahants, obviously, although they wouldn't have children, but they had the very, very skillful standards, so that there was a completely level playing field. It was completely fair shares for all. None of us as children were favorites. Everyone had equal shares, everyone had equal treatment, equal resources for everyone. We were all quite different personalities, so we were all interested in different things. But there was never any favoritism. And I feel that's a wonderful gift. And I feel that in the Sangha, and also the kind of position of leadership I have, I very consciously have, so having received that standard from my parents, I make the effort to make no favorites in the monastery. Some people is easier to get along with than others, or easier to understand than others, of course. But no one gets special treatment. No one gets special favors. No one is the star pupil. No one is the dud. Terrible word. But everyone is treated with absolute evenness, and I feel that's very, very important. And in terms of creating a beneficial and supportive environment. So when we look at our worlds, the world we've grown up in, then that quality of discernment, of recognizing what's wholesome, what's unwholesome, what's beneficial, what's unbeneficial. The things that are unbeneficial, like if you were the dud that wasn't worth educating, or the kind of the unwanted child that was unexpected and came along late, then those difficulties, or the kind of negative aspects that come from that kind of situation, they can be sources of great wisdom, that we can learn a lot from that situation. It's not just something that has to be a problem or a burden, but rather like that having been the conditioning, that piece of the world has got that tone, that shape, but that can be a source of wisdom. It doesn't have to be something seen as a fixed problem. So in terms of so going back to what I was saying first of all about how we create each other or project on each other. When relationships are based on self-view, then no matter how close we are physically, or sharing houses or sharing lives, there's always going to be some kind of feeling of separation. So it's a relationship of separateness. Even if you're trying to get close, if there's me here, you there, then there's always going to be a separateness there. When a relationship is based on a lack of self-view and on a genuine loving kindness, then there's a different tone. This can still be very, very loving, very genuine, and warm and friendly and delightful. But there's a much greater quality of harmony and communication, a genuine samagi, a togetherness. The samagi literally means meeting at the same point. The word for harmony, samagi in Pali, agi is like a point. Sama is together, so coming together at the same point. There's samagi, there's this a genuine harmony between us. When we love others based on self-view, the Pali word for that kind of love is piyati, piya, P-I-Y-A in Roman letters, piya, and this is a subject that oftentimes people find hard to deal with, or they feel the Buddha was a bit harsh, because the word piya is often translated as dear. When we have dear ones, when somebody is dear to us, not D-E-A-R, dear, like the precious, or that someone belongs to us, we belong to them. That piyati, that dearness, or piyata, technically, that dearness. The Buddha said, if you have 100 dear ones, you have 100 pains. 50 dear ones, 50 pains. 10 dear ones, 10 pains. 5, 4, 3, 2. 1 dear one, 1 pain. No dear ones, no pains. So that might sound a bit harsh, like that's a bit kind of cold-hearted. But he's talking about that particular kind of loving, which I would call a possessive love, or a love based on self-view. Like, I belong to you, you belong to me. I'm your partner, I'm your Ajahn, you're my Ajahn, you're my mother, I'm your father, I'm your daughter. All that I amness. Even if that's close and there's a lot of attachment, necessarily that's going to be painful. And that there was this sutta that is very instructive in this, called the Piya Jatika Sutta, born of those who are dear. But the Buddha makes his comment, said, yes, yeah, pain and suffering come from those who are dear to us. When we attach to each other with and this based on self-view and grasping, then even though we're trying to love or trying to be supportive or trying to be helpful, if it's based on those qualities, then pain is going to be there. But that's not the only kind of love, because metta and karuna, loving kindness and compassion, they also are genuine forms of love, but they are love which liberates. It's liberative love. It's non-possessive. So the Buddha encourages metta, like the more metta, the better, even rhymes in English. The more metta, the better. That the abundant, exalted, immeasurable, I will abide, pervading 1/4 with a heart imbued with loving kindness. Yes, metta for all beings, metta for your family members, metta for people in the office, in the hospital, in the monastery. The more metta, the better. So that kind of love does not produce suffering if it's free of self-view and free of grasping. So I feel that, again, in terms of reflecting on our relationships and the world that we live in, to get to know the difference between piyata, dearness, and mettata, and loving kindness, they're not the same. They have a different tone, a different texture. And so the more that metta and karuna and loving kindness and compassion can be genuinely cultivated and free of conceit, free of self-view, then we can have a very loving environment and very, say, supportive, very delightful, very enjoyable, and genuinely caring, genuinely loving and heartful, but free of possessiveness, free of the causes of suffering. And so this is a great encouragement. It's not easy to tell the difference between those two, the piya kind of love and the metta kind of love. But again, this is something that's helpful to explore in the meditation and watching your mind, and particularly feelings of missing somebody, or that you miss someone, or you're longing to be with them. Then that's generally a signal that that's on the piyata side of the equation. If you know that you love someone very much, but if they're not around, you don't miss them, then that's an indication that that's on the metta side of the equation. Not guaranteed, but these kind of ways we can learn to read our own mind, read our own attitudes, and then where we see that that kind of possessive love, that piyata, to know that, to feel that, to acknowledge that, and to recognize the stressing or the dukkha that comes from that kind of possessive love. So it doesn't mean that grief with someone that we love has passed on, or we're away from it. Doesn't mean that grief is a bad thing. It's natural to experience that that sense of absence. Even the Buddha made that comment after Venerable Sariputta and Venerable Mahamoggallana passed away. He was giving a teaching into an assembly of the Sangha, and he said, it's as if this assembly is empty now that Sariputta and Moggallana have passed away. So the Buddha felt that same kind of absence, but he wasn't creating dukkha around it. So again, this is a helpful area to explore and to look at. Okay, that my parents have passed on. How does it feel that they passed on? What's present in the heart? If those of you who've had partners, your husband, your wife has passed away, or children who passed away, that when that's brought to mind, how does the heart hold that? And can we find that the way that we can appreciate the presence of each other, and also the feelings of absence or sadness that someone's passed on, but without that kind of quality of clinging, attachment. It's not easy to describe, or the differences, and English is not the first language of most people here, but I do recommend kind of looking into this, particularly the areas where there are people that you are in conflict with, people that you're keen to always be close to, people that you're sad that have passed on or you're separated from, people that you're really glad that you're separated from, ex partners. May all beings be happy except her, or him. So it's really helpful to explore these kind of territories. Again, not to create a lot of prungdang, the kind of conceptual proliferation, but just to see how do we hold each other? How do these other folks sit in our perceptions, in our hearts, and getting to know that there's aspects of the world that we create, and then where there is attachment, where there's grasping, to know that, to feel that, and to let that go, and where the relationships, the connections are wholesome, they're based on loving kindness, compassion, and free of conceit, free of self-view, then to strengthen those, to support and to rejoice in those. So I offer these thoughts for consideration this evening.